They called him a liability long before anyone learned his name. On the rosters, he was Corporal Elias Kade, 32, infantry, reassigned to Fort Bayfield, a prairie base whose horizons were the color of dust and burned coffee. The first week, he learned which doors stuck in winter, which sergeants shouted to hear themselves, and which faces turned away when he sat down at the mess table. The second week, the stories arrived, handed around like contraband candy. He froze on a street in Al-Jarrah. He left 2 men behind in the alleys. He fired at a civilian car. He fainted in a stairwell. He broke on contact. The claims contradicted one another but agreed on the verdict: unreliable. Men clipped their jokes when he entered a room. Some didn't bother. Kade absorbed it with the stillness that makes an easy target. His shoulders stayed level, his boots square to the line, his answers short. The unit's group chat bloomed with memes drawn over a photo somebody found, a grainy image of Kade at a checkpoint somewhere, eyes blank, jaw tight. The caption read, "Do not disturb, soft crashing." The base had its traditions. A misplaced canteen was a punchline. A failed PT test earned truck tires dragged up the berm, the kind of laughter that hollows out people from the ribs. When the training cycle turned to urban breach drills in the mock village, plywood doors, rebar windows, sandbags bleeding sand, Kade ran the lanes without mistakes. He stacked where he should, covered sectors, called shots. No one said good job. On the catwalk above, a corporal leaned over the rail and told a medic to get ready to treat stage fright. The medic laughed. People laugh when they want to belong. Kade removed his blouse in the cage during gear check, and the marks emerged on his left shoulder and upper arm. Not a skull, not a flag or motto. It was a geometric piece, nested hexagons intersecting a narrow arc, a small ciphered numeral at the base like a manufacturing label. Some tattoos explain themselves. This one looked like a diagram of something taken apart and reassembled. Private Nussbaum held up his phone for a picture. Kade pulled the sleeve back without comment. Later, in the barracks, the image made its rounds. Someone suggested it was the logo of a gun company. Someone else said special projects use abstract marks. The chatter slid into the ether where rumors mineralize. At night, Kade lay on his bunk breathing through the metallic taste of recycled air. The barracks smelled of boot leather and detergent that never won the fight. Fatigue kept him quiet, but silence wasn't a strategy. It was a life preserver. He learned to count his breaths, to imagine a square. 4 counts in, hold 4, 4 out, hold 4. The technique belonged to another part of his life that Fort Bayfield insisted never existed. It helped him sleep in bursts. Days stacked without relief. The platoon sergeant treated him like a reluctant errand, the lieutenant like a risk assessment. "We'll see where you fit," the LT said, which meant anywhere you won't break something I care about. Kade made himself small, did the work. He learned the sound of the motor pool at dawn, the brief wind that travels across a range lane between volleys, the echo in the empty gym at Oro 400. He wore his discipline like an imperfect shield, and the shield caught dents. The jokes did not stop, they refined. On a Thursday, during weapons maintenance, a private set a bottle of gun oil where Kade's elbow would knock it. The bottle fell. The oil slicked the table and ran into the rack. "Hey man," the private grinned, "you freezing again?" Laughter flared, small, mean, brief. Kade cleaned the spill with rags he bought with his own money. The armorer watched and said nothing. People learned the price of saying something. What no one saw was the rhythm underneath Kade's movements, a quiet precision that belonged to a life beyond doctrine. He sorted parts by touch, calibrated optics by light alone, checked torque by memory. He had learned to move like a man who expected doors to fail and radios to lie. But Fort Bayfield didn't grade for that. It graded for not making trouble. And trouble is anything that forces a second look. The omniscient view pierces the barracks wall as easily as dust motes pass sunlight. It registers how easy it is to believe the first story you hear, especially when it decorates someone you do not intend to know. It notes the accumulated cowardice in systems, each choice small, each omission harmless, until the weight is intolerable. It sees how a man can be present every day and still be erased, and how erasure becomes habit. It sees the tattoo's lines under fabric, the small cipher glinting in a locker room bulb, the way a pattern waits for recognition like a mine waits for pressure. It notes, the pressure will come. Years earlier, his name was not Kade. Identities in certain corridors are like gloves. You wear the one that fits the moment, discard it without ceremony. In a windowless room below a floodlit building, he signed a non-disclosure that did not say forever, but meant it. He learned to answer only what was asked, to speak around the truth as if it were a sleeping dog. The program called itself Latchkey Aegis, which was nothing like its purpose. You cannot name a knife after what it does. They trained at night for places where electricity was a rumor. He learned old radios and newer ones, lock sets from 3 continents, how to map sound in a stairwell by the echo from the first step. He learned to fight without vocabulary and to run without witness. The cadre came from units that are publicly thanked but never fully named. They had a rule about the body: keep it boring. No flamboyance, no scars you can avoid, no gear that suggests a film set. The second rule was about outcomes: there will be none you can claim. When the call came, the tasking slid across a gray table with a rubber edge. 7 in, 1 asset out, 23 hours inside the kill box. The asset was a forensic accountant whose algorithms had activated a network that preferred things uncounted. If he lived, indictments in 3 capitals. If he did not, the ledger returned to smoke. The route in traced a broken ring around power stations and cell towers. The route out did not exist on any map the team possessed. If you plan to survive, you plan to improvise. They wore civilian clothes with the right-wrong creases. They carried weapons that looked borrowed from an uncle. They moved at edges where cameras are cheap and maintained by no one. 12 hours of careful luck passed like a well-rehearsed lie. They reached the safe house at dusk, found the accountant pale and shaking, a man whose eyes kept landing on the window latch. They drugged him lightly, enough to still his hands and stop his complaints, and began to withdraw along a narrow street lined with closed stalls. The first shot took Jensen in the throat. The second smashed Mirov's wrist. The third hit the wall inches from the asset's knee and rattled loose plaster like salt. Ambushes sound the same across languages, the long thunder of certainty. Kade, another name then, dragged the asset behind stacked crates, felt splinters bit like tiny insects. He saw Zaidi go flat and still, Hollis trying to crawl on his elbows, Nava firing 3 measured bursts before a round folded her onto her side. The team comms dissolved in crosstalk and static, and then in grief. The fallback plan had a fallback plan. Neither applied. The ambushers knew their streets and their distances. Somebody had sold the route. Inside the blast radius of betrayal, you stop wondering about who and start surviving the next 10 seconds. Kade moved by muscle and math. Arc, cover, break, cross, pivot. He counted steps because memory can hold numbers when it cannot hold faces. He bled from a tear high on his arm that would later scar into the lines of a tattoo. He put the accountant's head against his hip and his feet under the man's center of gravity and dragged him like awkward luggage. The alleyways offered choices that weren't. When he took the left, a bullet slapped the brick. When he took the right, a man appeared with a pistol and doubt in his eyes, which ended him. It is ugly to say, uglier to live. They reached a flood canal miles from where they all were supposed to be. Stars broke on the surface like scattered glass. The accountant vomited and tried to negotiate. Kade told him to walk. Radios were dead. Cell networks were weapons. He cut through the bones of construction sites, through scaffolds that swayed in breathless wind. Once they crouched in a culvert while men with flashlights walked above them, speaking the cruel calm of hired professionals. The accountant cried without sound and then slept with his mouth open. Dawn found them under a bridge, the light a thin blade. A truck came at noon, canvas sides, engine coughing, the driver a cousin of someone who owed a debt. They lay angled on the bed under sacks of stale rice, the accountant whispering apologies in the rhythm of prayer. On the outskirts, a low field made of crushed bottles crunched like ice. The driver stopped where instructed, where no one would ever write an address. Kade levered the accountant out and saw for the first time the helicopter's nose at the horizon. It came closer, the rotor wash beating dust into their mouths. He counted the time for a landing, calculated the arcs that would be open to fire. He waved it off. The pilot answered with an obscene gesture of grief and left as ordered. 4 days later, Kade crossed a line on a map that existed only in the room with the rubber-edged tables. He walked until boots and feet became the same pain. He surrendered the asset to a team that did not know his name. In the debrief, he spoke into a recorder about angles and timings and why he chose to refuse extraction. The room listened. Then silence hardened. Files closed. Colleagues became pleasant strangers. You cannot congratulate ghosts. Policy required a cover narrative because classification protects secrets, and when bureaucracies grow frightened, it protects reputations that should not be protected. His record absorbed a disciplinary fiction, an incident abroad that corrupted judgment, a lapse under fire. He accepted the pages and the implied exile. In some corridors, the price of success is to be erased. It is a currency the system spends freely. He signed where they pointed and left with a name that could be printed again. At Fort Bayfield, cruelty arrived in content-ready packages. A training holiday meant bored soldiers, and boredom produces experiments. 2 specialists followed Kade into the supply bay and bounced a crate from a dolly so it skidded into his shins. Phones came out as if by reflex. "Show us the Al Jawra shuffle," one said. They smeared grease on a rag and tossed it at his chest, and someone filmed the splash and the stillness that followed. The video hit a private channel, then leaked into one with broader membership. The subtitle read, "Demo, Freezing Under Pressure." The humiliation was not cinematic. No crescendo, no last word monologue. It was the low, constant vibration of insects near sleep. Kade cleaned the stain on his blouse in the sink behind the vending machines. He changed in a bathroom stall and returned to finish the inventory. The supply tech avoided his eyes. Complicity wears many expressions. When he passed the day room, the video played on a phone propped against a PS5 controller. The men laughed a little. Even when you know it's wrong, laughter is easy. He kept walking. Second Lieutenant Rowan stood in the doorway the entire time, hands in his pockets, jaw clenched against his own inaction. He was new enough to believe in the manual, and old enough to know the manual will not shield you from your captain's displeasure. He watched it all with the frozen face of someone performing a betrayal, small by small, of his private oath. Rowan had passed Kade's tattoo in inspection 2 weeks earlier, had made a joke about clean lines and commitment. That night, the memory of the geometric mark returned with the force of a forgotten appointment. He could not place it. He opened his laptop and searched terms that did not exist, then asked a sergeant with too many clearances for a professional curiosity favor. The sergeant told him to drop it. Any abstract emblem with ciphers would be classified or nonsense. Rowan did not sleep. The threat arrived from an unexpected direction. A retired warrant officer in the maintenance shop noticed Kade's habit of double-checking torque values without being asked. He liked quiet competence. He had been quiet and competent for 28 years. At lunch, he mentioned half to himself that he had once seen hexagonal stamps on crates that didn't go through normal channels. He said the font on the numbers looked similar. "On what?" Rowan asked. The warrant shrugged. "Stuff that got here without getting here." He returned to his sandwich and the sports page. Outside, wind pushed dry grass against chain-link fences so it sounded like low rain. The base calendar rolled toward Division Week, a parade of inspection and staged excellence. Kade's name did not appear on any ceremonial list. He was scheduled to check barricade kits and replace missing breaching charges that would not be used. When he put on gloves to count flex cuffs, he did it with the same care he had given to a sleeping asset's wrists years earlier. Actions, once learned under pressure, migrate. They attach themselves to new contexts like barnacles. That afternoon, Kade's phone buzzed with a number not stored. "Nice art. Where'd you buy it?" He deleted the message and turned the phone face down, the screen reflecting a ceiling stained by an old leak. In the evening, he called his sister and asked about her kid's bad cold. He said nothing about his day. He never did. You do not burden civilians with the small erosion of honor because they will try to fix it with words, and words are not the right tools. Rowan built a private catalog of almosts, an archived procurement photo with a blurred mark in the corner, a redacted memo using the word latchkey in lowercase, perhaps a clerk's error, a sentence in a trade journal about non-standard equipment routing for agencies not named. Each piece meant little. Together they formed a negative space shaped like an answer. He printed nothing. He left no notes on the base network. He waited for Division Week because Division Week meant visitors. People think revelations come with trumpets. In truth, they arrive as patterns too consistent to ignore. The omniscient view counts the views on a video. 12, 90, 200, 8,000. After someone reposts it to a larger feed with the caption, "Morale Truth." It notes who watches to the end and who doesn't, who mutes, who opens the comments. It records Rowan canceling a date because he cannot stop searching. It watches Kade wrap tape around a loose handle and make it better, because making things better is a reflex you can practice even when no one credits you for it. It watches the tattoo under cloth like a fuse under drywall, and it marks the calendar. General Halley will arrive on Tuesday, unannounced, as is his habit. General Archer Halley had earned the right to walk into rooms without asking. 40 years in uniform had purified his curiosity into something hard and efficient. His staff learned to tolerate the detours, the hangar with the broken light he'd notice, the motor pool inventory he would spot-check with the patience of a watchmaker. On Tuesday, he appeared at Fort Bayfield like weather. He shook a few hands, asked the colonel about maintenance cycles, and then drifted. The mock village looked good from a distance. Most things do. Halley preferred the warehouse, where truth stacks itself in cages. He stepped inside and paused. Neat rows, labels aligned, a rhythm in the work that suggested pride or compulsion, or both. He noticed a man with his sleeves rolled high, gloved hands moving through a crate of riot shields as if laying out a chess problem. The man turned. Halley saw the face, then the tattoo. Hexagons intersected by a narrow arc, a tiny cipher below, the lines exact as if cut by a draftsman. Halley's voice carried a private frequency when he asked, "Where did you get that mark, Corporal?" The warehouse quieted the way air does before a storm. Kade squared unconsciously. Conditioning lives in bone. "Off the record," he said, the words shaped by someone who has delivered them before. "Sir, I can name the program and not the work. Latchkey Aegis. There were 7. He stopped. "You do not speak numbers beyond that." Silence has densities. This one was heavy, metallic. Halley's face recomposed a fraction at a time. First surprise, then calculation, then a recognition so intimate it bordered on grief. The general had read eyes-only summaries that bent global outcomes by degrees unreported. He had seen after-action lines that made no sense unless you imagined a human being inside the impossible. He had signed the memo that required disciplinary fictions to mask classified reassignment because he had believed it was necessary. Belief rarely survives contact with consequences. "Lieutenant Rowan," Halley said, not loudly. The young officer appeared as if the general had pulled him from behind a curtain. "I'll need this soldier's black archive, not the public jacket, the thing behind the thing." Rowan's spine warmed with fear and triumph. He left at a run. News outraced him along the hallways. By the time he reached the secure terminal, half the base knew the general had asked about a tattoo. In under an hour, the file arrived, printed on paper because some truths prefer pulp. Halley read standing at a cage desk while the room held its breath. He turned pages backward, the way people search for a foothold in a flood. He saw the 7 names and the 6 that ended. He read the route, the field improvisation, the refusal wave-off, the 4-day walk. He read the recommendation for valor that had been transmuted into silence by a stamp. He read his own signature authorizing the cover. He remembered the day. He remembered how tired he had been. He closed the folder and addressed the room without raising his voice. "Corporal Kade," he said, and the name sounded like it finally belonged to someone he could see. "This institution owes you an apology." The colonel arrived late, breathless with the needs of optics. Soldiers gathered where they should not, the way people do when history squeezes into a warehouse. Someone reached for a phone before deciding, for once, to put it away. The apology did not erase anything. Apologies never do, but it rearranged the air. The base saw a man who had endured 2 years of unresisted slander stand as if waiting for a radio to clear. Administrative machinery began to churn. The cover memo was rescinded. The fake counseling statements were voided. The medals recommended long ago were retyped and re-signed. Halley ordered a review of Fort Bayfield's informal culture with terms that meant business, mandatory reporting, third-party oversight, anonymous channels with teeth. Rowan asked to speak. He said he had watched and had done nothing. He said it into the quiet that makes truth sound larger. The general did not praise him. He nodded once. Complicity acknowledged is not virtue. It is the beginning of work. Kade listened to the promises like a man checking his breathing. He did not smile when they put the paper in his hand. The document's font was the same as the one that had damaged him. Bureaucracy can injure and it can heal. Often, it uses identical forms. When the Bronze Star with Valor slid into its velvet, when the Defense Superior Service Medal followed, he accepted both with steady hands. He did not let them weigh more than they should. The omniscient view records the shifting calculus of every observer. the private who had shared the video and now studied his boots, the sergeant major who looked at Kade as if he had sprouted a second head, the colonel counting reputational costs, the general counting lives. It sees Kade examine the edges of a metal case like a man considering a tool he is not sure how to use. It notes what no one says aloud, that the system prefers quiet remedies because quiet draws less blood. But some wounds require light. The story refused to stay in the warehouse. Someone in public affairs tried to keep it internal. Someone else sent a redacted brief to a committee staffer who knew how to leak responsibly. 2 veterans groups wrote letters sharp enough to draw blood. A journalist in town for Division Week asked the only question that mattered: how did the truth become a rumor and the rumor become the truth? No one answered on record. Off record, the explanations braided into the usual rope: classification, timing, competing priorities, the risk of precedent, the fear of embarrassment. Ropes like that can strangle. Fort Bayfield scrubbed its feeds and changed nothing for 48 hours. On the 3rd day, the colonel convened a formation no one wanted. He described new disciplinary pathways that bypassed chain-of-command choke points, announced an external ombuds with authority to trigger independent review, and mandated bias and bystander training that would not be performative because the general would be checking. Men shifted in their boots, the way people do when institutional words try to reach their bones. The warrant officer from maintenance stood with his hands behind his back and thought about hexagonal stamps on crates that arrived in the night. Kade's record corrected itself with the unceremonious speed of a system trying to erase its own fingerprints. He was offered reassignment to units where his kind of experience isn't discussed in break rooms. Special Operations Command made its interest obvious by not making it obvious. The path back into shadows lay open: better pay, higher consequences, zero applause. He asked for a different path. There is a place in the military where those who are injured, physically, morally, spiritually, try to reassemble themselves enough to rejoin the world. It has bureaucratic names that mean transition and warrior and care. Kade requested transfer there as cadre to help men and women rebuild the capacities that paperwork cannot measure. The general's first response was no. The math of the institution wanted him where tool and task align. But Kade insisted. "Sir," he said, "I know what it is to be left behind while standing in formation." Halley approved the request with a line in the margin: "The institution must learn from the damage it does while doing its duty." Rowan's career bent sharply. He spoke at a closed hearing and later on a stage where the backdrop showed flags and the title, "Professional Ethics in a Culture of Risk." He told a clean version of the messy truth, that a junior officer's fear of his senior's displeasure ranks with weather as a persistent hazard. He didn't polish his own role. He named it. The audience shifted in their seats. Some took notes for performance reports. A few felt something move behind their ribs and did not know what to do about it yet. 6 months later, the Army announced the Silent Ledger Initiative, a program to locate, acknowledge, and where possible honor service contributions buried by classification. The mandate was narrow and carefully written. Skeptics called it optics. True believers called it overdue. Families received letters that did not heal but helped. Some graves got names that matched the stories told at kitchen tables. The logo for the initiative was bland by design, but somebody in a back office slipped a pattern into the background. Faint hexagons and a curve you would not notice unless you knew. On the base, the video incident did not vanish. It became a training artifact, stripped of sound, accompanied by a dry slide about professionalism. The change that mattered did not live in slides. It lived in small acts: a private who stepped between a joke and its target, a staff sergeant who pulled a phone out of a hand and said, "We don't film each other here." It was not uniform. Cultural change never is. But the frequency shifted, laughter recalibrated. Kade started work at the Transition Company, a building that smelled of antiseptic and coffee and muted desperation. He learned new paperwork, new acronyms, new ways to measure progress that did not look like progress. He watched a Marine with a tremor put a spoon to his mouth without spilling and understood the size of that victory. He watched a signals specialist cry because loud noises felt like raids and taught him the square breathing trick because some tools travel well. He did not talk about latchkey aegis. He talked about mornings and walks and the muscle memory of simple kindness. A letter arrived one day from a corporal who had once joked on the catwalk. It was brief and without self-defense. "I was wrong. I'm trying to be better. If you don't want to hear from me again, I understand. Kade did not reply. He placed the letter behind a framed photo of his sister's kid with gap teeth and a crooked smile. He did not keep the medals on his desk. He kept a list of names that ended before they should. He did not read it aloud. The omniscient view observes the wobble in every reform, the committee that goes too slow, the commander who treats a mandate as an inconvenience, the genuine hearts who grow tired. It also registers the contour of stubborn hope, how it takes the shape of policy stamped by the same machine that stamped harm, how it can survive cynicism like a plant in poor soil. It records Kade walking the hallway at dusk, the fluorescent lights humming, the door to the group room ajar, the sound of low conversation that is not therapy and not confession, but something between. It recognizes work. The center stood at the edge of a town that felt temporary even in summer. Its parking lot cracked along old seams. Inside, chairs did not match. Matching was not the priority. Kade arrived before sunup and checked the coffee machine as if it were a weapon. He emptied a trash can without thinking about rank because rank cannot carry a bag to the dumpster. A whiteboard bore the day's plan: PT, light, skills, finances, group, open topic, clinic, 0900, 1200. Someone had added in a careful hand, bring ear protection, roofing next door. Clients, patients, participants, pick a term that fits your politics, filtered in with the staggered pace of people fighting different wars at the same time. Marta, a former EOD tech missing 2 fingers, practiced zipping a jacket with her offhand. Grant, who used to drive convoys through nameless places, learned to say, "I need 5 minutes," before anger ran ahead of him. Solis, 25 and stuttering after blast exposure, carried a notebook where he wrote words that wouldn't come. Kade moved among them with a steadiness that never tried to dominate the room. He showed how to tape a wrist that hurts in the cold. He showed how to handle a panic surge without naming it, by breaking the next minute into parts. At noon, a young man arrived, shoulders forward, eyes alert in the way that means hypervigilance. He wore no unit shirt. The absence was its own uniform. His intake form read like an inventory of solvable problems that masked the ones harder to name. In the group room, he didn't sit. He circled once and perched by the door. "I heard what happened to you," he said to Kade later, voice almost defiant, the way everyone believed the worst. Kade nodded once and said, "You're here. That's the important part." The man's jaw worked and then unlocked. Sometimes the building filled with sound that wasn't noise, laughter that had nothing to do with cruelty. Someone brought a guitar. Someone brought a puppy because a therapist said a dog might help and the landlord had a loophole. The puppy peed on a rug and nobody shouted. In the afternoon, Kade walked the perimeter, an old habit that looked like a security check, which it was, and also like a ritual. He counted fence posts and paced the back lot where weeds insisted on living. He noted where the shadows lay at different hours. Memory likes maps. An invitation arrived from a congressional subcommittee to testify. It used neutral language to ask him to tell a story that would entertain cameras. He declined with the sentence, "My work is here." The general, now retired, texted a thumbs up and then a line. "Some victories prefer anonymity." Kade considered the phrase and let it pass. He didn't need the word victory to do the work. He needed attendance. At dusk, the roofing crew next door fired up nail guns. The sound stacked into a thudding that pushed Grant toward the door, breathing thin. Kade caught him with a hand light on the shoulder. "Walk with me," he said. They stepped into the hallway and traced rectangles with their feet, door to water fountain to exit sign, to waiting room to door again, like soldiers patrolling memory. After 5 circuits, the noise was just noise. Grant said, "Thanks," as if apology and gratitude were the same word. They often are. The center ran on donations from people who preferred their names absent from plaques. A box by the door accepted folded bills. A former teammate of someone Kade once knew sent a case of ear defenders with no note. The market across the street delivered leftovers at 1500. The staff divided tasks without ceremony. Nobody asked Kade for his old file. He would not have provided it. Every few weeks, a letter or message arrived from a name associated with the old days. Once, an agency liaison wrote to say a family had been informed of a son's actual death, not the training accident they had been told. The letter did not mention Kade, but it smelled of justice, not clean, not complete, but present. He printed it and filed it behind the other's paperwork, where only he would see it. He kept certain rituals private. Grief, like faith, prefers quiet rooms. One night in late autumn, power flickered across town. The center's lights died, then returned, then died for good. The group room went dim except for street glow. The generator coughed once and refused to catch. People froze the way bodies do when reminders arrive uninvited. Kade moved. He found the flashlights, handed them out without commentary, lit 2 candles in coffee mugs, and set one on the table like a small planet. He opened windows to cool the rooms and called the utility company with the patience of someone who has learned that systems fail. The clients breathed. Someone told a joke almost under their breath. The laugh that followed was soft and harmless. Later, after the power returned and the coffee machine beeped like victory, Kade checked doors and locked the back gate. He stood in the parking lot under a sky scraped clean by wind. Somewhere a siren climbed and fell. He thought of the tattoo he had stopped noticing. The lines now part of the landscape of his arm. Patterns fade when they are no longer needed to remind you who you are. He walked the perimeter once more, not because danger was likely, but because steadiness is a discipline. He turned off the last light. The omniscient view pulls back. It sees the reforms continuing and stalling in turns, the way all reforms do. It watches a culture relearn the difference between silence as strength and silence as harm. It notes that none of this produces headlines for long. It sees Kade arrive the next morning and the next, early, with a list that looks plain and is holy. Call the VA rep, order the wrist braces, remind Marta to try the zipper again, ask Grant about the roofing noise, check the coffee machine. It records a world improved by inches and insists on the arithmetic. Inches matter.